National Institute for Communicable Diseases has issued a red alert for typhoid fever in parts of South Africa. Investigations of the outbreak are ongoing in two provinces, the Western Cape and the Northwest, after a spike of cases in those two regions this year. Typhoid fever is a systemic illness caused by a bacterial infection with Salmonella, which spreads through contaminated food and water. Symptoms include fever, loss of appetite and body discomfort, as well as diarrhea and constipation. Now, to discuss this and give us more, we speak to Epidemiologist and Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Moshabela. Professor, thank you so much for your time this morning. This is quite concerning, but before we even get into anything deeper around this typhoid fever, what exactly is it?
Yeah, good morning, Soro, and to the viewers as well. I think I really like how you introduced it as a systemic illness because it's an infection that spreads and it gets into people, it infects people through food and water, and therefore through the intestine. People just think that it's just an intestinal disease. It is also an intestinal disease, but it's actually a systemic disease, which means that it affects different parts of the body system. And I think that's really important because a lot of people then struggle with figuring out exactly how it's going to present, because we are used to diseases that tend to affect one particular organ of the body. But then dealing with an infection that spreads throughout the body, that becomes quite challenging to navigate for the public. But it is caused by a bacterial infection. You know, when it comes to diseases, we often look at the causes of those diseases. Most infections that we talk about, like HIV and COVID, are caused by viruses. And then in this one, in terms of typhoid, it's caused by a bacteria called Salmonella and Salmonella typhi. And this organism only infects humans. It doesn't have a vector or anything, and that's why when it spreads, we know that it usually spreads because of how we as humans interact with the organism. And because it infects the intestine as well, we spread it through defecation or stools. And then if we don't wash our hands properly, then we touch food with infected hands. And then also, you know, it can enter into water systems. And then if the water sources are exposed to infected stools, then also poor sanitation, then also we come into contact with it. And so once it gets into a person, then it becomes easy for it to spread from one person to the next. And once it's infected a person, then it causes a lot of fever in the first week, and then begins to present with general symptoms like body pain, sometimes vomiting, and it can cause cough. And then in the second week, it starts to cause more serious illness like maybe pneumonia, or it can cause constipation, sometimes diarrhea and vomiting. And in the third week, it starts to cause complications, whereby you can find people having confusion, or people are having organs, intestines that have holes that may even require surgery. But usually, once the complications starts to occur, then it becomes a lot more serious infection, which is why it is life-threatening in many instances.
I was actually going to ask that very question about whether it is life-threatening or not. But now we are told that this has actually been found in the Northwest and in the Western Cape. So is it really an outbreak if it's found in these two provinces? And what more should really be done by the Department of Health to get more information about this, or to send information out to the country about this typhoid fever?
So it warrants for us to take it seriously, because if it's not treated with the necessary antibiotics, mortality can go as high as 20%, which means that 1 in 5 people that are infected can die. But if it's treated properly with antibiotics, then mortality can decrease to less than 5%, between 1 and 4%. So, which means that there is benefit to people actually accessing care, being diagnosed properly, and making sure that that we reduce the chances of people dying from typhoid. To answer your question, I think that given the alert notice that has been released, it really kind of now opens up an opportunity for the Department of Health to begin to inform people, educate people, because a lot of how it can be controlled really, it's about what people can do in terms of making sure that they practice proper hygiene, they boil water, they wash food properly, and make sure that if there's anyone who is diagnosed, that person does not touch food or cook for the family so that we can avoid spreading it. But I think the education component is really important. Then the department also has to make sure that they do an outbreak investigation where they can find the source. Sometimes you find that there's contaminated water source, and if there is, they need to actually stop it and make sure that they can stop the infections from flowing. And the third thing that's important is to make sure that for those people who have to travel in those areas, then they can also get a vaccine. There are 2 types of vaccines that people can access, but they are not part of the schedule for vaccines. These are vaccines only that are prescribed whenever they are needed.
Prof, do you think that we should panic at this stage?
No, I don't think that we should panic. We've had the worst epidemic we had of typhoid was the one in 2005 in Delmas, where about 3,000 people were infected. So far, I think that we have detected about 50 cases in the Western Cape, maybe slightly more now, and about 20 cases in the Northwest. So they are more than usual, but I think that it's a signal that we have a problem. It's not yet at a point where we should panic, but we should really have a high index of suspicion. One of the things that really causes a lot of harm from typhoid is the lack of careful thought about it, and therefore behaviors. We don't practice good behaviors in terms of hygiene and practices, but also lack of high index of suspicion. If someone is sick with these symptoms, they can be diagnosed with other things. They can be diagnosed with flu or cold. They can be diagnosed with gastroenteritis or dysentery or something else that or prolongs the harm that comes from typhoid. The high index of suspicion becomes really important. So the awareness, I think, is important. The behaviors, our behaviors, and therefore also for clinicians to have a high index of suspicion so that they can diagnose it. Diagnosis is not easy, but it's important. And also for government to make sure that we find the source of the outbreak, and then we start to control it going forward.
Now, Prof, a middle-aged woman has become the first female and third person in the United States to have been cured of HIV. The woman suffered from leukemia and HIV and received a transplant of umbilical cord blood as part of her cancer treatment. She has since not needed any antiretroviral treatment required to treat HIV and has been in remission and free of the virus for 14 months. What do you think of this discovery and development for us?
Yeah, so the past week has been interesting from an infectious disease point of view. That case, as well as the issue of polio in Malawi. But I think in terms of this particular case, we have to understand that it is a very intensive process that's involved in clearing a person of infection. And we have to remember that this person was most likely taking antiretrovirals before and undetectable. And what they are dealing with is the virus that we call, that is hiding in the reservoir. And because of the treatment for cancer, it means that then they were able to clear the viruses that's in the reservoir that is hidden. And once that hidden virus is removed because of treatment for leukemia, then the person requires transplant from a person who would be resistant to HIV. And so this is it's not really a cure in the sense that it can be used in other people per se or on a large scale, but it's a cure in the sense that this person no longer has HIV for now and no longer has has a need for antiretroviral treatment. But we must just be careful in terms of how we handle the narrative so that we don't imply that it's a promise for something that can be used for other people. But certainly it does open up a lot of research questions and opportunity to say what are the options that we can think of in the future, but not necessarily. Right now, I just want to be clear that this person is lucky, but it's not something that is easily translatable for many others who may also need cure. So we're still a long way in terms of cure.
Yeah. Epidemiologist and Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you so much for your time, Prof. Moshabela.